Under the auspices of Just Folks, described by Lindbergh's newly created Office of American Absorption as a volunteer work program introducing city youth to the traditional ways of heartland life, my brother left on the last day of June 1941 for a summer apprenticeship with a Kentucky tobacco farmer, because he'd never been away from home before, and because the family had never lived with such uncertainty before, and because my father objected strenuously to what the OAA's existence implied about our status as citizens, and also because Alvin, already off serving with the Canadian Army, had become a perpetual source of concern. Sandy's was an emotional leave-taking. What had given Sandy strength to resist our parents' arguments against his participation in Just Folks, and planted the idea to apply in the first place, was the support he'd received from my mother's vivid younger sister Evelyn, now executive assistant to Rabbi Lionel Bengelsdorf, who'd been appointed by the new administration to serve as the first director of the OAA office for the state of New Jersey. The announced purpose of the OAA was to implement programs encouraging America's religious and national minorities to become further incorporated into the larger society, though by the spring of 1941, the only minority the OAA appeared to take a serious interest in encouraging was ours. It was the intention of Just Folks to remove hundreds of Jewish boys between the ages of 12 and 18 from the cities where they lived and attended school, and put them to work for 8 weeks as field hands and day laborers with farm families hundreds of miles from their homes. Notices extolling the new summer program had been posted on bulletin boards at Chancellor and Weequahic, the high school just next door, where the student population, like ours, was nearly 100% Jewish. One day in April, a representative from the New Jersey OAA had come to talk to the boys 12 and over about the program's mission, and that evening Sandy showed up at the dinner table with an application blank that required a parent's signature. "Do you understand what this program is actually trying to do?" my father asked Sandy. "Do you understand why Lindbergh wants to separate boys like you from their families and ship them out to the sticks? Do you have any idea what's behind all this? But this doesn't have anything to do with anti-Semitism, if that's what you think. You have one thing on your mind and one thing only. This is just a great opportunity, that's all." "Opportunity for what?" "To live on a farm, to go to Kentucky, to draw all the things there. Tractors, barns, animals, all kinds of animals." "But they're not sending you all that way to draw animals," my father told him. "They're sending you there to fetch the slops for the animals. They're sending you there to spread manure. You'll be so bushed by the end of the day you won't be able to stand on your feet, let alone draw a picture of an animal." "And your hands," my mother said. "There's barbed wire on farms. There are machines with sharp blades. You could injure your hands, and then where would you be? You'd never draw again. I thought you were going to take classes at Arts High this summer. You were going to take drawing with Mr. Leonard." "I can always do that. This is seeing America." The next night Aunt Evelyn came to dinner, invited by my mother, for the hours Sandy was planning to be at a friend's house doing his homework. That way he wouldn't be around to witness the argument that was certain to flare up between Aunt Evelyn and my father on the subject of Just Folks. But that didn't indeed erupt upon her entering the house, to announce that she would be taking care of Sandy's application the moment it reached the office. "Don't do us any favors," said my unsmiling father. "You mean to tell me you're not letting him go?" "Why should I? Why would I?" he asked her. "Why on earth wouldn't you?" Aunt Evelyn replied. "Unless you're another Jew afraid of his shadow." Their disagreement only grew more passionate during dinner, my father maintaining that Just Folks was the first step in a Lindbergh plan to separate Jewish children from their parents, to erode the solidarity of the Jewish family, and Aunt Evelyn intimating none too gently that the greatest fear of a Jew like her brother-in-law was that his children might escape winding up as narrow-minded and frightened as he was. Alvin was the renegade on my father's side. Evelyn was the maverick on my mother's, a substitute elementary school teacher in the Newark system who'd been active several years earlier in founding the left-wing, largely Jewish Newark Teachers Union, whose few hundred members were competing with a more staid, apolitical teachers association to negotiate contracts with the city. Evelyn was just 30 in 1941, and until 2 years before, when my maternal grandmother died of heart failure after a decade as a coronary invalid, it was Evelyn who'd cared for her in the tiny top-floor apartment of a two and a half family house that my mother that mother and daughter shared on Dewey Street, not far from Hawthorne Avenue School, where Evelyn usually subbed. On the days when a neighbor wasn't free to stop by to keep an eye on our grandmother, my mother would take the bus over to Dewey Street and look after her until Evelyn got home from work. And when Evelyn went to New York to see a play with her intellectual friends on a Saturday night, either our grandmother would be driven to our house by my father to spend the evening with us, or my mother would return to Dewey Street to tend to her there. Many nights Aunt Evelyn never made it home from New York, even when she'd planned to return before midnight, and so my mother would be forced to spend the night away from her husband and children. And then there were the afternoons Evelyn didn't get back until hours after school was over because of a long-standing, off and on love affair with a substitute teacher from North Newark. Like Evelyn, a forceful union advocate, and unlike Evelyn, married, Italian, and the parent of 3 children. My mother would always contend that if Evelyn hadn't gotten waylaid for all those years nursing their invalid mother, she would have settled down to marry after getting her teaching certificate and never have ended up falling in and out of unsavory relationships with married men who were her fellow teachers. Her large nose didn't prevent people from calling Aunt Evelyn striking, and it was true, as my mother observed, that when tiny Evelyn walked into a room, a vivacious brunette with a perfect, if miniaturized, womanly silhouette, enormous dark eyes slanted like a cat's and crimson lipstick guaranteed to dazzle, everyone turned to look. The women as well as the men. Her hair was lacquered to a metallic luster and pulled back in a chignon. Her eyebrows were dramatically plucked, and when she went off to sub, she donned a brightly colored skirt with matching high-heeled shoes and a broad white belt and a semi-sheer pastel-colored blouse. My father considered her apparel in poor taste for a schoolteacher, and so did the principal at Hawthorne, but my mother, who wrongly or not reproached herself for Evelyn's having had to sacrifice her youth caring for their mother, was incapable of judging her sister's boldness harshly. Even when Evelyn resigned from teaching, quit the union, and seemingly without a qualm abandoned her political loyalties to work for Rabbi Bengelsdorf in Lindbergh's OAA. It would be several months before it occurred to my parents that Aunt Evelyn was the rabbi's mistress, and had been ever since he'd met her at a reception following his speech to the Newark Teachers Union on the classroom development of American ideals. And they realized it only because, on leaving the New Jersey OAA to assume the job of federal director at the national headquarters in Washington, Bengelsdorf announced to the newspapers news of his engagement at 63 to his 31-year-old firebrand of an assistant. And we'll pause there.